Hello, welcome to today's show. I'm Jacqueline Stockwell, CEO and founder at Leadership Through Data. I inspire and motivate information leaders across the world.
I am joined by Rob Gerbrandt. He is a transformational strategist with over 30 years of leadership, rooted in foundation as a former army officer, with elite credentials including CD, PMP, and IGP, along with being a fellow of the Institute of Information Management. Rob has led at the highest levels, most recently as the global head of IG advisory at Iron Mountain, where he's managed multi-million-dollar portfolios and global teams. He is a master of information governance and change management, and he specializes in aligning people, process, and technology across highly regulated environments. He is a proven growth engine, once increasing a client database by 270%. And reoccurring revenue by 137% through innovative strategies and data governance, AI, and compliance. Now, Rob is on a mission to transform information from a liability into a competitive asset. By building robust lifecycle frameworks, he helps organizations navigate the complexities of risk and AI, ensuring they aren't just compliant, but they are operating at a peak strategic level. Now, welcome to the show. It's absolutely sensational to have you. Many companies are rushed to feed their LLMs, so large language models, decades of legacy data. How do you prevent AI from hallucinating based on obsolete, redundant, obsolete, and trivial data that should have been deleted years?
Thanks for this, Jackie, and I'm really pleased to spend some time with you today as well. This is one of those classic start points, right? Everybody's challenged by two things when they talk about AI: content and context. The context, of course, has got to be built into the AI model itself. But content is all about what goes into the model. You're right. Organizations today are moving from that point of view that it's just a structured data set into they've got all this other information, all this other content that they want to be able to tap into. But as you and I know so painfully well, rot, redundant, outdated, and trivial, takes up an immense volume of content. I've often heard and used the stats between 60 and 80% of content that exists today would fall into those categories of rot. Organizations struggle with that. They struggle with keeping it clean to begin with. And now with AI, they're struggling with, how do I get access to this potentially invaluable content that I want to test and use in my LLMs and in my AI models without adding to the risk? So of course, it falls back to those old practices that you and I have always talked about. Clean your content, get rid of information when it's allowed to be gotten rid of, keep the best copies. Because Lord knows, nobody needs to have 57 copies of a PowerPoint presentation. Nobody needs to have all those cat videos that we've downloaded so many dozen times off the internet. And nobody needs to have those lunch invites from 12 years ago. That's what rot is today. And it's the challenge of that, getting that cleaned up, removing that risk, that will help organizations position themselves better for AI.
So do you think like companies, I think they look at AI as the technology and they forget the data kind of that's in it, that feeds off it, that grows from it, that gives it all its outputs. But do you think organizations are missing a trick when it comes to leadership? Because actually it's leadership's, are they too reliant on the data that comes out? Are they not doing enough checking on that information? It's kind of a really interesting piece around redundant, obsolete, and trivial, because are organizations making decisions based on rot because it's an output of AI, which is then causing to bad business outputs, risk to reputation, and all the vulnerabilities that kind of come with that as well?
I think you're right. I mean, it comes down to that perspective of governance itself. How are you governing your information estate exactly? And how are you considering AI governance? Because there's a lot of conversation going on across our ecosystem of communities about AI governance, whether it's done as a standalone activity, just focused on improving the quality of those AI models and ensuring that those AI models are compliant with the for example, EU AI Act or the US NIST AI risk management framework. I also throw in there the UAE AI framework to sort of think about those different ways of doing it. But organizations really are struggling with that governance side of the house. What is the information that they want to have to put into those models? Right? They haven't yet solved for that true governance umbrella that covers both information governance, data governance, privacy governance, cybersecurity, and AI, all of that together.
Yeah,
That's the opportunity of the next 18 to 24 months.
100%. And then there's the people aspect on top of it, because you've got the technology, you've got the governance, and then the people that are actually using that data on reports and decision making and performance based things. That actually, I think there's a big fear around AI because it's going to take our jobs. But when you look at it from a leadership perspective, there's still a place for all of what we do, plus more now, I think, because you've got that additional, is this data correct from the data that it's being pulled from?
And who's got the right controls in place? Who can actually stop the AI from doing an output? That's another interesting governance challenge.
And have you got an answer to that, Rob?
Maybe somebody's got to be declared outside, at the outset. Somebody's got to own the risk. It's not a technology risk. It's a business risk. We always used to say, and we always continue to say, of course, that records are owned by the business. Heck, the classic definition of them is that a record is an output of a business process. Someone in the business has to own that record. Someone in the business has to own the outputs of an AI model. So that person has to be named, defined, held accountable, created with the conditions of accountability to be successful.
And it's an interesting one because how do you govern all of that without stifling innovation or slowing down innovation? So, like, how do you govern the dark data that AI, is now dependent on without slowing down innovation?
I think part of that is that governance. You think about that governance layer, it now really needs to be integrated across this whole space. We can't just talk about AI governance in a silo. We can't talk about records management or information governance or data governance in silos. We've really got to talk about the intersections between all of them and advance the conversation to make sure that when we're talking about the risk that sits over in AI, we're actually considering the fact that the source of that risk may be an IG-related risk because we're keeping too much content for too long.
Information governance is built on the principle of disposition, so deleting data when it's no longer needed. AI models, however, want to keep everything for training purposes. How do you resolve that conflict between the right to be forgotten and the desire for a permanent AI training memory?
This is one that's haunted us for years. Organizations have, fought the urge to push that delete button or that disposition button because it's easier to not do it. I didn't create that record. I'm not going to authorize the deletion of it. I don't know what's in it, so we'll just put it back on the shelf or keep saving it and add more storage. So disposition is one of those perennial challenges. The challenge that we think about from an IG side of the house, especially with the disposition of records, there's a great reason to actually not retain those records for longer than necessary or longer than you're obliged to keep them because it eliminates a risk in doing so. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't anonymize the content that sits in that record, or you can't completely transform it to take it away from that record and still make it usable within an LLM down the road. So there are ways through privacy screening, through anonymization of the content, through other dimensions there that we can take the content, keep it within the context, and use it downstream in AI without compromising the behavior or changing the behavior, perhaps, of disposition. Because as you know, disposition is such a spectrum.
Indeed. So if an AI makes a business decision based on governed records, so how do we maintain a chain of custody for that decision? So how does IG evolve to provide an audit trail for an algorithm?
That becomes an interesting challenge, right? because, if you think about it even further, say, well, what part of AI or the AI interaction should be a record? Is it the prompt? Is it the model? Is it the output? Go back to that classic definition of a record being an output of a business process. It should be the resulting content and material that's produced from the AI itself, which is the record. But that audit trail really becomes the key piece. And how do you sort of ensure that authenticity and integrity of the data source? In some cases, we have to be able to acknowledge that, if we transform that, if we anonymize that content, we're still going to keep the context of that content. So we can have traceability back to it. But do we need it to be specific to that one exact record? Probably not, because most of the material value that people are going to see in records are going to be from a larger scale pool of records that we can actually use and anonymize the outputs on. So again, it's not necessarily that we're keeping the discrete single record for longer than its retention period and retention obligations. We're keeping the information that's associated.
So records, you've then got PII, so personally identifiable information. So we've seen cases where sensitive PII is leaked through AI prompts. What specific information governance controls must be in place before a company turns on an internal generative AI tool?
This is the big question that sits in so many rooms today. How do I ensure that when I throw the on switch, that the content that's going to be consumed is the right content? So part of it goes back into that design exercise around the AI itself. Part of it goes into the education and informing of the employees themselves. Shadow AI, we all see it. Everybody and their brother and their sister will download some new model or other model that comes in and start using it. Every once in a while, they're going to point that at something on the shared drive and create that leakage risk that you just talked about, whether it's PII, PHI, IP even, or information that's not complete, so not 100% accurate. How do you sort of control that? A big piece of it is through awareness and education. Can't automate it completely. We've got to make sure that we've got our people aware of the risks, aware of their obligations in doing so. There's policy layer work that has to be done around that, around use of AI. It wasn't that long ago, in my sort of vintage at least, that you had an email use policy back when email was beginning. You had to have the policy around what could you do email for, and the internet use policies, all those pieces. So we're seeing ourselves in that next generation. So how do we sort of tie those pieces together? And how do we make sure that people are aware of the risk? People are aware of the fact that you shouldn't AI at uncontrolled data sets. You shouldn't introduce unnecessary risk. It's still going to happen. We can't avoid it completely. We should never sort of think that everybody's going to be on the right side of the fence. It's going to happen. Today, without AI, we still see leaks of PII, PHI, IP across the board. We're going to see those leaks accelerated. Nouns of IT, link it back to cybersecurity. Tighten those knots.
Also, I think you're going to get me on my very passionate horse now here. And I say horse because I've got one. Organizations are very, very happy to roll out AI. And you talked about education and training. Education and training is obviously what leadership through data do, but I do see that it gets put on the back end of things. And then information leaders, so that's everybody that you've talked about, I call them leaders, so records management, privacy officers, AI, data governance, so anybody that manages information, aren't always part of that AI project, right? So if they were part of that AI project, organizations have got loads of money for AI, right? For the new shiny technology that they're able to. If information leaders were able to be part of that AI technology piece, that education and training piece, you could roll out that compliance, you could roll out the kind of because they'd be part of that transformation. And I think that's a real, closing the loop when we're talking about AI.
I agree with that. I mean, connecting those threads, deliberately doing change management, deliberately acknowledging that there's a cultural dimension to these efforts. It's not simply, throwing open Chat GPT. You've got to understand the implication of it, and you've got to deliberately do your adjustments. You've got to deliberately take your steps forward to train people, to educate people, to protect people.
Yeah, 100%. And you've got to think that and talking about that, the law moves a lot slower than technology now. As an information governance professional, how do you build a framework that is future-proof enough to handle AI regulations that haven't been written yet?
I think for me, it's not anchoring myself in one regulation. I spoke earlier, I put together an AI governance maturity model. We're launching that shortly. Rather than just anchoring that to, say, the EU AI Act. And many organizations will do that because if we think about the parallel of GDPR, I believe firmly that the EU AI Act is going to be a global model for everyone. But again, it's just one model. For me, when I talk about the governance maturity, I look against the EU AI Act, I look against the US NIST AI risk management framework, and I look at it against the UAE AI framework. Three very different perspectives on AI and success of AI. So rather than just anchoring it and anchoring a roadmap and a perspective on one regulatory framework, I think it's incumbent upon us to really step back and for us to become informed on the broader implications and to be able to introduce multidimensional perspectives in that conversation.
So you've worked on a global scale and you've led global teams. Does a modern information governance professional need to understand neutral networks, or is it enough for them to understand just policy? And what is the new minimum for IG talent in 2026? I'm going to get your crystal ball out here.
Yeah, I'm always cautious in that crystal ball sort of. I think we are in a transformative stage within our community of practice of IG professionals. We're seeing a lot more conflict, a lot more compromise between the IG community and the data governance community. We've got to solve that one as a community of practice. We've got to be much closer. That's why, as I said earlier, I prefer to use the terms content and context. Content doesn't matter whether it's a record or whether it's data or whether it's information governance or data governance. Bring it all together. Think about it in that side of the house. And then the context equally extends from there. So I think our community is ripe for a next generation opportunity, a real transformative step to expand ourselves. And it wasn't that long ago where the primary focus of our community was still in the realm of records, right? We've really gone in this last half decade or decade into an expansion mode as we've become more privacy oriented, as we've become more cybersecurity oriented, as we've thought about data, as we've thought about the physical records and the electronic records, all of that together. So I think AI is going to be an exciting opportunity for us to really step up our game and to expand our thinking and connect threads across multiple communities of practice.
Just leading into that, Rob, I think in terms of 2026, what we're kind of seeing is that transition from the silo kind of departments to actually the influencer within the business. So we're very much, as information leaders, having to lead and influence. We're having to have different kind of roles. So we could be an entrepreneur, which means you work inside an organization, and you're an entrepreneur without the financial risk, pretty much, because you're having to revamp your information services. You're having to get people to buy in, to communicate, to sell, to kind of get them on board with all the changes in technology, clients, and actually kind of get the job done. And that's kind of the one thing that I think 2026 will push more and more around us as the people factor. Because AI, as we talked about right at the start, is a leadership thing. So you can use the technology if the data's bad, but it's also the leader's responsibility to validate that data.
I agree. I think it's an exciting time for us. It's an exciting time for us to really transform and step up what we do across the board.
Can you quantify the cost of bad data in an AI project?
When you look at the results of bad data, first of all, massive hallucinations is what you end up getting. Because again, if you're pointing it at just at your C drive, at your shared drive, perhaps, you've got uncontrolled content across the board. You've got partially finished PowerPoint presentations, partially finished Google Docs, partially finished, XYZ, type content. So how can you actually get the outcome that you're looking for? So we're going to see bad outcomes. We're going to see hallucinations. We're going to see failed outcomes. There's a great story that I think we've all heard about a CFO's team that had pointed their AI at their financial data set to do part of their financial planning. And, the AI came up with this marvelous projection and marvelous set of outputs. And the CFO, as I understand the story goes, went to the board and presented this output. Either during that presentation or shortly thereafter, came to realize or was told that something went wrong because the outcomes made no sense. So when we don't use the good information, when we use bad data, when we use rot content, when we just pointed at the wild, wild west of content, we're going to end up with the outcomes that are not what we're looking for and are going to create huge risk, reputational risk, financial risk, operational risk, all the classic risk profiles.
Tell me one key takeaway that listeners can take away from my life.
I think it's the excitement of this time. We are in an interesting space, being information governance professionals and practitioners of influence. We can actually improve the quality of those outcomes. We can help standardize that content. We can help create better outcomes rather than just sitting there. So bang on the door, get yourself at the table, and talk to your colleagues that are sort of going down this journey. Avoid that silo as much as possible.
100%. And have an elevated tip that people can remember you as soon as you walk into the room. So, Rob, it's been absolutely sensational today. Continue to be bold, be brave, and be beautiful. Where can listeners reach out to you?
Yeah, I guess the easiest way to do that is to go to my website, rmgim.ca. You'll find my background. You'll also find my blog that I've been building out over the last 18 to 24 months. Teaser, I'm going to take that blog and hopefully by the end of this year, convert it into a book. And so I'm inspired by you, Jackie, to do that. Be a good thing. So please come to my website, check out my blog. I'm available on LinkedIn. All of that content is directly linked through there as well.
Thank you so much for your time, Rob.
Thanks, Jackie. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to the Journals of the Information Entrepreneur with me, Jacqueline Stockwell. I hope you found this episode inspiring and helpful and have some takeaway tips that can be useful to you. If you liked this episode, please like, review and share it with your friends. Your support helps us reach more information leaders to stay inspired and listen to great content. Want to test out your strengths and weaknesses and measure it against our Empower framework? Please complete the scorecard. It's a great way to improve and evaluate your skills. You can find the scorecard at the end of the description of this podcast. Stay tuned for a new podcast every Thursday, and remember to be bold, be brave, and be beautiful.